Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Joel. We're just going to do is just for those of us, for those of you, for example, who have not come across Hope for the Future before, we're just going to intro ourselves. So we are a climate-focused democratic engagement charity. We're based in Sheffield, but we are scattered all over the UK. For example, I'm in Manchester. Joel is in Oxford. We do have a vision of UK communities and politicians working together to secure a healthier planet for all. And by that, really, we mean that we want to see a bottom up approach whereby we are ensuring that we are holding our elected officials accountable and that they are listening to us as well. And again, with that, our work, and we have lots of impact stories here. People do have the power to influence change. And most importantly, we want to ensure that we are using that power to our advantage as we build the bridge to a better and safer future for all. We just want to tease out as well one of our new and exciting tools that we launched earlier this year, which is called Climate Connect. And here it does a couple of things. It brings together all other companies that are prevalent in the UK, and within that, we're trying to ensure that people are staying informed and get real-time updates on climate and nature politics. So, for example, if you are going to meet your politician around a specific issue, you can go on to Climate Connect, register yourself, and then you can say to people, "I'm going to meet my MP or my councillor," and then you can also put an ask card as well to say, if you want to come along, please do. And essentially, it just means that we're able to see and we're able to see and get people connected and ensure that we are actually holding politicians to account. And then again, it's about ensuring that we are taking that meaningful action, we're tracking that progress. But fundamentally as well, which is one of the reasons why I like it, is about connecting with other people. It means that we are not alone. We are fully understanding that the climate and nature crisis can mean that sometimes it feels hard, but Climate Connect is supposed to lessen that burden, right? Ensure that there are people who are like-minded and keen to get on board as well.
One of the bits of feedback we regularly get from those on the ground who are engaging politicians on climate natures, they often feel like they're doing so alone and they don't know who else in their area is doing so. And Climate Connect is really one way that we're trying to link people up much more. Not only so, we have lots of people come to our trainings and come and be supported by us, but also so that you're also linking with each other. So obviously today we're going to be talking about meeting with your MP. If you do decide to go on and have a meeting or run an event or do something else with your politician, then Climate Connect is where you can log that. And as Cyril says, it's then an opportunity to connect with others in your local area who are engaging with the same MPs or other politicians on climate and nature issues.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Joel. Just a quick session outline as to what this hour is going to look like. So Joel and I, as you realized, we're going to be pinging and ponging between the two of us, just so that you hear a diversity of voices. And again, we're very much keen to hear from you as well. So please keep the questions coming. But we will touch on the reasons why you should meet your local MP to talk about the budget. And here, conscious of the UK geography, this can also mean for those that are in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland as well. And then we're going to touch on what it means to prepare for your meeting, and then the meeting itself, and then finally, as mentioned before, we're going to have the next steps and the Q&A. So with that, I'll pass over to Joel to talk us through the budget, just to give us an overview as well and some grounding.
Thank you very much, Cyril. So this is the fourth in a series of training sessions, which is about engaging politicians around the autumn budget. All the other three sessions, for those who weren't able to attend, are on our YouTube channel. We're going to share a link to those sessions. We'll trail them at the end of this training, and we're going to share a link afterwards if you would like to catch up. But the whole idea of this training session was considering the autumn budget a really great opportunity to engage with politicians, and the moment when I imagine certainly we at Hope for the Future, and I imagine many of you as well, feel most engaged with or activated by what's going on politically. The one of the things we wanted to do just before we go into more detail on how you can have really good quality meetings with politicians is just consider what were the potential impacts from the autumn budget on what we would consider climate and nature issues, or maybe what was in there as what was not in there. Because I think the main headline here is that actually this budget was not a climate and nature budget. We've had a few much more climate-y and nature-y budgets over the last few years. This was not one. We pulled out a few key things now, which I'll highlight, but it's as much about what was missing from the budget as much as what was in there. And I imagine many of you may feel, some of you might be involved in local and national campaigns where you are hoping for there to be other policies announced or other progress pushed through the budget that maybe was missing. So I think today, when we're talking about what do we really want to be engaging with politicians on, it's as much about what is there as about what is not there. But just in terms of what we pulled out and we see as significant budget-wise, so EVs are now going to pay a road charge from 2028. This is something that has been trialled for a long time, but is obviously as more cars on the road become electric, they don't currently pay road tax. It's a way of the government continuing to be able to raise revenue to maintain public infrastructure as that transition accelerates. Rail fares are going to be frozen next year. Only a small thing, obviously frozen at what is already quite a high price, but is still a positive move in terms of incentivizing people to choose low carbon alternatives to vehicles. And the 5p fuel duty reduction, which was introduced in 2022, is going to be extended, but after that, that will hopefully be that will be removed after that time as well. On the renewables front and insulation front, renewable energy subsidies are going to be moved from energy bills and placing them into general taxation. That is quite a technocratic thing, and it's quite a small thing, but what it means is that it's a small improvement in terms of people's individual energy bills. It means that those subsidies are now going to be paid basically out of the general taxpayer pocket rather than directly through energy bills, which generally speaking is seen as a positive move because it better represents some of the benefits from renewables coming online, coming into the grid, which at the moment we're not really seeing that much benefits-wise in terms of sort of the public pocket. The ECO scheme, Energy Company Obligation Scheme, is going to be scrapped. So for those of you who are maybe more knowledgeable about insulation and retrofit, this is something that has subsidized lots and lots of retrofit work over the last few years. That is being wound down, which generally is seen as a negative thing, but there are other initiatives being put forward by this government, which they claim are going to basically plug the gap when it comes to retrofit. The Warm Homes Plan, which is coming online next year, should be the opportunity for the government to really incentivize and put much more money into retrofit. So it remains to be seen whether the scrapping of eco is either a good or a bad thing. And the final thing, which actually wasn't in the budget but was announced on the same day and announced around the same time, is that the government reaffirmed and really formalized their commitment to ending North Sea oil licensing. Some of you may be aware, for example, of the Stop Rosebank campaign and other transition and divestment campaigns that go on right now. There's not yet been a formal decision on the Rosebank oil field. That could still be approved, but it's really positive and I think reinforcing for those of us who support the sort of climate and nature side of things that this government clearly really is committed to the energy transition, and that was reinforced alongside the budget as well. So back over to you, Cyril.
Thank you very much, Joel, for that grounding, and hopefully it was very much useful. Again, it was good for me as well just to relearn all those things that you touched on, Joel. So thank you very much for that. We're now just going to touch on reasons why you should meet with your MP, and maybe I just want to pause here and get a sense check from the room as to if anyone here has met their MP in this year or the last year, for example. If you can maybe just pop in the chat when you met your MP, and you don't have to write this down, but just think about how it made you feel, how that engagement with that MP made you feel as well. But yeah, it would be nice to see on the chat if anyone has met their MP as well. But what are the reasons as to why we should meet with our MP? And Nimoni, hopefully I'm saying that right. Yeah, it's great to hear that you met with your MP twice this year, which is absolutely fantastic, and we'll love to hear more about that as we go along on this call. But essentially, it is about connection and building a personal relationship. And Hope for the Future really do believe in a relational-based approach with engagements with politicians, and really we are proponents of building a good personal relationship with them. And it's also about trying to ensure that we're having a dialogue instead of an exchange of statements, right? As climate activists, sometimes we don't want to be preachy. We've been accused of being preachy, but again, we're just trying to go past that and actually have a conversation, that dialogue, right? Because we believe that a dialogue actually goes beyond that exchange of statements. it shouldn't be like, prime minister's questions in parliament. We don't want that, right? But one of the things as well, what as to why you should build a relationship or meet with your MP, is about trying to get a commitment and dedication from them, right? The issues that we care about are very much personal to us, but also they mean the world to us and our communities and everyone else, right? And we want to ensure that politicians are as committed as us, right? That they are able to meet to meet the moment as we want them to be. But also, we also have to be aware of our humanity as well. And one of the key things that we try to get out to people is that politicians don't know everything. They're generalist in nature, and sometimes we are experts in our lives, right? You only you know exactly how much you're paying for your energy bills. You know exactly how littered your streets are, or the lack of green spaces that is. And within that, when we're putting our needs and wants to politicians, we ought to show some humanity, right, and humility as well. And again, as as we are just coming out of the COP30 in Brazil, we saw a lot of corporate lobbyists, right? If you look at the number of oil and gas executives, right, that were able to get meetings with ministers, key governmental ministers, it means that activists such as ourselves, right, are constantly on the back foot, right? So again, by us coming together, we're able to ensure that we're countering corporate lobbyists. Now, as you are meeting your MP, one of the key guardrails that we always say people should think about is preparing an agenda, right? And that agenda allows us to work within specific guardrails. I keep mentioning that phrase; it's one of my favorite phrases. But essentially, when you're preparing an agenda, if you prepare an agenda, it allows for you to make sure you cover your key issues and concerns, right? And sometimes with meetings, right, an MP could say, for example, we can have a meeting for an hour or 45 minutes. So again, that guardrail, right, it allows you to be able to cover your key issues and concerns. And then with this, and again, I'm very much keen to read the chat, and I will do it in a second. But if you are attending with other local groups as well, again, hopefully you're putting this on Climate Connect. It means that you're able to make sure that all the members that are attending agree to who will lead key sections as well, right? It ensures that you're able to say, like, right, you do the intros, you cover this point, and then someone else will cover that point. Again, it means that the meeting is able to flow efficiently and smoothly as well, and everyone feels heard and seen. And then again, one of the key things that we always try to caution people is that sometimes when you overly structure your meeting, it can prevent a more free flow conversation. Again, coming back to that aspect or perspective of, like, we want to have a dialogue rather than sharing statements, right? And again, when you share an agenda ahead of time, it can allow the MPs to prepare their party line as well. So this is one of the things that you ought to be aware of. But again, we're not saying that you shouldn't be preparing this agenda or shouldn't be sharing this agenda ahead of time with them as well. Because again, it will be insightful to get some thoughts from them as well.
One of the bits of colour to add here, I think, is that depending on your politician and your MP style, it can be good to know how formal or informal to make the meeting. So for some politicians, for example, we find that doing something which is more informal, more casual, for example, inviting them to go for a walk around a local nature site can be a really effective way of actually, it can be disarming. It can be more, it can be an easier way of doing that, more that relationship building, which Cyril just talked about. For other MPs, they can be very formal. They tend to respond better actually when you are much more agenda set, when you do have much more of a sort of script you're following. The challenge is that if you've not met your MP before, it's difficult to know which of those two approaches to take. So I think it's important to just basically do whatever is most comfortable for you. I think some people will be more comfortable in environments which are more informal, where maybe you don't want to set an agenda, but others, it may feel like if you have that structure and you have a really clear agenda that you've agreed between you, that it will make you more confident in what you are communicating. But once you have met your politician or your MP once, you'll get a much better idea of how they prefer to be communicated with and what works best in terms of getting your point across.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Joel. And yeah, that's very much important. Like, again, conscious of the levels of, it looks like people have either met their MPs this year, and some have just written to them. But again, having that personal relationship, right, will further enhance, right, or further shed light as to how you should be communicating with them. But again, one of the things that we are coming from here is like if we're talking to like a beginner activist as well. But again, one key thing as well, which I've been guilty of in the past, is having an agenda means that you can stop waffling, right? I've been guilty of waffling in the past, but having that agenda means like we're able to ensure that we're hitting all the key points and concerns that we want to raise with them. So with that as well, one of the key things is thinking about how do we come across, right? And here, some of you might have heard this from maybe from a work or business setting, but there's something called an elevator pitch. Right, and an elevator pitch essentially is a short, snappy introduction to an issue that you want to put across, and what it is, why it matters, and it should be about less than an elevator ride. I live in an apartment building, and I'm on the 11th floor, and I've actually calculated that I've got 26 seconds before from the ground to my apartment block, right? And I've tried playing around with that, and with the minute I'm at 30 seconds. But again, it's just to give you a sense really as to how much time you might have with someone or with a politician. So one of the key things that you need to reach are put across who you are and who you represent, right? Whether it's a community group or whether you're just representing yourself, what the issue is that you are there to speak about, and why this issue matters to you, and how it affects the community, and why you think it should matter to them. Right, so very much like very short and snappy, and includes a hook as well, and it should outline, rather give a clear explanation of the issue for that politician. You want them to remember you. You want them to be like, oh, okay, yeah, I actually met Sue. I actually met Cyril or Joel, and I'm able to get next time I'll meet them, I'll remember that issue as well. Joel, I don't know if you want to come in here as
Yeah,
well.
I was just going to say the other thing on elevator pitches is that even if you have a really well planned agenda and a really well structured meeting, as soon as you get into the meeting itself, naturally there will be, a sort of natural ebb and flow of the conversation, and you may not be able to cover everything you want to. So if you go in prepared with a really clear statement of intent at the beginning, that is your opportunity to hold the floor and make the key points that you want to at the beginning of the meeting. We quite regularly see politicians, especially backbenchers, standing up in Parliament, and they'll say, I care about this issue because my constituent Jane came to me and said to me that this is their experience and this is why they really care about it. And that is happening more and more. And the more that we can come up with really short, compelling messages that can, as Cyril says, really fit into an elevator pitch right at the beginning of your meeting, the more that we can get our points across really clearly. And that can be, really impactful and memorable for a politician who is, either maybe used to less constructive conversations or used to people being more, attacking, less defensive. We're going to talk about defensive behaviors shortly, which can really help with getting your point across. But the more that you're able to go in really clearly with the point that you want to make, I think the better you can then set the tone for the rest of the meeting, and the better you can set out your stall right at the beginning.
Fab. Thank you very much for that, Joel. So one of the things as well, just as we round this session up, is talking about things that you want to prepare as well, just to make sure that you got all the kit or all the essentials for your meeting. So you want to record of the agreed date and time. Make sure your appointment is as it could be, or before you can meet your. Sorry. You want to make sure that you record all the agreed date and time, and make sure your appointment as it could be a while before you meet your MP again. Have some specific ask of your politician, and here again we will touch on what smart ask are in the next session when I pass over to Joel. But one key thing that to be aware of here, we can help you with this, and we've helped many people across this year as well. And those that were at the Mars lobby, I can attest to that. Hopefully, if you did meet one of our people, and then you want to point the politician towards actions that they can take to make the change needed. And so I'll be really keen to hear from you as well. Sorry that it was sound like it was a very frustrating ordeal that you had with your MP, even though you met them twice. But again, we can talk more about this as we get to the defensive aspect of engaging MPs, but also at the Q&A as well, because we'll be keen to see how we can help out there. So, but also do keep a pen and paper to keep notes on what is said and what is agreed. And within that as well, once you've done that, once you get those notes, do share the notes with the MP's office or with your representative office, right? Saying like, right, we agree that you will read this aspect of, say, for example, the climate nature bill by this date, and you will get back to us by this date. And with that, it keeps everyone honest as to exactly what was agreed in the meeting, and ensures that the next time you meet, you're picking up from where you left off rather than starting all over again, right? And again, with that, it ensures that you are building on that relationship. That you are saying to the politician, we want to ensure we're communicating on this issue. We might not get the answers that we wanted in, say, for example, the first meeting or the second meeting, but fundamentally, so long as we are looking towards the future through the future actions that will come up from this meeting, you're able to keep that relationship going. And with that, Joe, I don't know if you want to come into that, or we should get into the smart asks.
Sure, let's move into smart asks.
Awesome.
So just on the previous section that Cyril was talking about, I think just to reflect on, I think a meeting I experienced with an MP that I thought was really effective, and was an example of I think some constituents using some of those tools really effectively at the Mass Lobby, which I can see from the chat that some of you in this room were at. I facilitated a meeting with one constituency group and their MP, where the group had come together, and there were, I think, 20 of them in that meeting, which is obviously much larger than I imagine many of the meetings that some of you might be organising or might be interested in doing, which may be more one-on-one, but there were quite a few in this meeting, some of whom had self-organised locally and put together a survey of local residents' views on local climate and nature, and basically had like a manifesto they were coming forward to their MP with. But before the meeting, we spent 10 or 15 minutes together and basically agreed who was going to be speaking in what order, what key points were going to be made, and then what key asks were going to be put forward to the MP. And when the MP turned up to the meeting, they did something which I've seen quite a few politicians do, where they go, you agree that you're going to meet for an hour, and they turn up, they say, I've only got 25 minutes. That's a classic thing. And we'll come on to defensive behaviors, but that was a classic defensive behavior. But because the group was so self-organized, and because they had agreed who was going to speak, when, what asks were going to be put forward, they basically managed to squeeze the maximum amount of value out of that 25 minutes. They put forward their manifesto. They had a really clear set of smart asks, which we're going to talk about in a moment. And they achieved actually a really good outcome, where they were able to deliver their manifesto to the local MP, and then the MP agreed to attend a roundtable of local residents as a follow-up to that meeting in the autumn, which I do believe then took place. So just as an example, I think, of where this can be used really, really effectively, especially the agendas, the sort of more formal talking points, that can be especially helpful if you are meeting with others or in a bigger group. We did run, as part of this training series, a training on a full training on formulating what we call smart asks. As I mentioned, in follow-up to this training, I'm going to send a link to the YouTube, and there's a full hour-long training on this. But just a quick recap, because we do feel they're like so critical to achieving really good outcomes with MP meetings. We talk a lot about smart asks. An ask simply being something that you are going to ask your politician to do. And from my point of view, if you are going to have any interaction with a politician, it's always really important to make sure that you have a really clear outcome that you want. And SMART, many of you who have been in the working world will know, the acronym specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timed. Essentially, it's just about making sure that what you are asking of your politician is really clear and achievable and relevant to them. And one of the key, and I won't go through all of them, but one of the key applications of the sort of SMART model is the thing I'm asking of my politician, is it reasonable? And is it within their purview? So, for example, if you're going to, we're talking about MPs today because we're talking about the budget, but you could very well be going to meet your local councillor, maybe your local parish councillor, your local city councillor, your district councillor. And what it's really important to do, and this is where research comes in, it's really important to consider, what is within the power of the politician I'm meeting. So if I'm, for example, asking about a policy that I wanted to be put into the budget, but I'm meeting my local councillor, that is not going to be a smart ask, because I'm going to be asking something of my councillor, which is actually at the Westminster level, not at the local authority level. Similarly, if I've got an ask around the delivery of a local climate initiative, and I'm asking, and I'm meeting an MP from a different constituency, that's probably not going to be within their purview. So it's about making sure that what you're asking is really relevant and really achievable. But there is a balance. We want to be ambitious. We want to be really clear that what we need is, more action, more ambition, etc. but we also need to be pragmatic about what is achievable by individual MPs and politicians. So really getting that balance right is very difficult. But if there's something that you really care about, something really specific, and you can formulate a really coherent ask around it, it makes it much more likely not only that your politician will feel empowered to actually make the change or make an action that you want them to do, but also that you will then feel that you've come out of your meeting with a really clear agreement or commitment. If there's any questions on Smart Ask, we can come on to them in the Q&A. So we're going to briefly talk about the meeting itself. Cyril, just before we do that, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just a short thing, and thank you very much for that, Joe. One of the things with the Smart Ask, even though it's like we're breaking down as an acronym, you don't have to hit
Mm,
every aspect of that acronym, right? So long as you get something, so for example, a commitment around something that you can measure or that is relevant, that is perfectly fine as well. You don't have to go through the whole acronym, but
mm.
that acts as a guideline as to like what you should be looking to in your conversation with your politician. But yeah, pass
Thank you.
over
So
to you, Joe.
yes, I completely agree. So what I often say to people is you should be aiming for a smart ask, but if you get an art ask or a murat or a SAR, then that is good enough. It doesn't have to be every single one. Thank you, Cyril. I think that's an important thing to caveat. So we're going to talk very briefly about meetings themselves. And just interested at this point, if anyone has any thoughts on what makes a really good meeting, what makes a really good meeting with a politician, and or if you have met with your politician before, then what has made that, if you have had a positive meeting, if you've had a good experience, then what has made that so effective? And if anyone has any thoughts they want to share, then please do so in the chat as we continue to talk. Um, so we're going to talk a bit about defensive behaviors as an example of something that really makes not a good meeting and how we can avoid them or how we can adapt and balance our approach to try and mitigate them. And you'll see at this point, this is where my colleagues who developed the slides took on a really real animal theme with with the slides here. So, what is a defensive behavior? Many of you will know this. Defensive behaviors essentially are reactions or coping mechanisms that people put up if they think they are being attacked or if they think they're being affronted. The easiest way to see them is basically as barriers or walls, not that are impermeable, but those that can be maneuvered or moved around if one starts to see them. But if one goes into meetings, either being able to spot the signs of defensive behaviors or be able to adapt your approach or plan your approach so as not to have those walls put up, then we can really mitigate the impacts that defensive behaviors can have on meetings. So how can politicians get defensive? Many of you will really recognize this not only in potential interactions that you've had with politicians, but just in general when you may have seen politicians speak on TV or in the media. A classic one is jumping to defend their own record or their party's record. So very often you'll see, for example, if anyone has watched Prime Minister's Questions, PMQs, you'll see that a classic thing is when a question is asked on a policy area, very regularly it will be, well, here is what the government has done, here is what my party has done so far. That's a classic defensive behavior. It's about talking back and talking about what has been done as opposed to talking about the possibility. Presenting things as impossible when potentially we know they're not, disengaging from conversations or kicking the can down the road. It's important to say that there are lots of, especially in climate and nature, where we know there are, huge mountains to climb. There are reasons, legitimate reasons, why some things may not be possible within a politician's purview or a political party's remit. That being said, if we're able to use the approaches we've talked about today to try and develop a really positive dialogue, there is very little which can't be moved forward. There is very little where we can't, make incremental improvements in specific areas. And thinking back to the smart asks, that is where smart asks can be really helpful. Because if we are breaking down big issues, which obviously the climate crisis, the nature crisis, these are huge existential issues, and if we're breaking them down into really good, tangible actions that are relevant to a politician's purview, then that can be a really effective way of trying to avoid what can become defensive behaviors or potentially antagonistic conversations. So how can defensive behaviors block collaboration? So often in politics increasingly, unfortunately, with how divisive politics is getting nationally. It is often individuals and political parties who are being attacked directly and records that are being attacked directly rather than focusing on more on broader policy issues. Often, I think people go into conversations with assumptions or presumptions about what the other's views are. Making accusations or focusing on previous failures, and also then focusing on division. One thing that we talk about a lot, I hope, for the future, and one thing our sort of really our whole theory of change is based on, is the idea of common ground. It's the idea that in our longer form training, we talk about seeing politicians in 3D and seeing that they are individuals with their own priorities and interests and things that they really care and passionate about. And in many cases, you will find that even if you feel you are in a very different place to a politician or even diametrically opposed, there will be common ground that you have, and focusing on what brings people together, focusing on what is mutually beneficial or people mutually love, can be a really effective way of moving action forward and avoiding those more defensive conversations. An example of that, I think specific to climate and nature, is that especially when the national policy picture is looking very challenging, focusing on local issues and focusing on the delivery of local nature, local net zero can be a really effective way of building common ground because there is no I believe there's no MP in this country who doesn't really actually genuinely care about their constituency and care about what people in their constituency think. So really focusing on the local can be a really effective way of building that common ground. Four principles we talk about for avoiding those defensive behaviors. Again, some of you, this is drawn from a whole bunch of literature, so some of you will be very familiar with this. Positive and open body language, being an active listener and participating actually in a conversation rather than just trying to get your points across, working together, focusing on collaboration, and of course, staying positive. And there can be really small shifts in language and framing that can have really major impacts on conversations. So, shifting language from how people can work together on something, how we can collaborate, and it being less avoiding being accusatory and avoiding pointing out, for example, previous flaws or failures can be really effective. At this point, if anyone has any other thoughts about how we can counter defensive behaviors, or maybe examples of where you've seen defensive behaviors successfully countered, do share those in the chat. Be really interested to get your thoughts. And then finally, it is possible that you may have a meeting with a politician, you may have a meeting with your MP, and actually you've tried all of these tools, and there is still that defensiveness, and there is still feels like there are those barriers. That can be really difficult. And obviously, what we're presenting today, this idea of collaborating and this idea of building relationships with politicians and with MPs, that's one approach. It's not the only approach. I mean, there are 100 different ways of trying to get your point across, trying to get your voice heard politically. But the more that one focuses on the relationship building side of things, the more that one has regular and consistent contact, the more that it can be effective in building that relationship and breaking down some of those barriers. The other thing is to consider is that if you are engaging with an MP or a politician one-on-one, sometimes demonstrating that there is a wider constituency mandate, so doing some level of local organizing, can be really, really powerful and effective. What we often hear from MPs, when we, as an organisation, work in Westminster, we often hear, well, I never hear about climate and nature on the doorstep. I don't think my constituency cares. We know from national polling that people do really care about this stuff. It's just that people are much more likely to turn up for other issues at the moment, necessarily, than they are for climate and nature. So anything that we can do to help demonstrate wider constituency mandates, wider community concern, can be so powerful in terms of turning the tide, in terms of building that common consensus. And then the other thing to consider often is, are they actually the right person to be engaging with? So again, that goes back to considering the smart element of the approach. It's how can you make sure that if you have a specific thing you're trying to achieve, how can you make sure that you're speaking to the right person? So we do work, for example, with the Stop Rosebank campaign, which is trying to stop the development of the Rosebank oil field. And that is something that you can talk to a local council or a local politician about. But ultimately, that's a piece of Westminster policy. So an MP is the right person to be speaking to about that. Similarly, if I was concerned about a development on a local greenfield site, or I was concerned about the impact on my local river of a development, maybe actually I'm better off speaking to my local councillor about that than my local MP. So you might find sometimes that you go into a meeting, you're finding that you're not getting anywhere. It may be that actually approaching a politician at a different level can be really effective in trying to navigate that conversation. The other thing is that often working across different levels of politics can be really effective. So when we do support for community groups, which we do quite regularly, I hope, for the future, we will often organise roundtables and events where we bring together local councillors with a local MP, maybe even with a relevant government minister, and that can be such an powerful way of driving an issue either locally or regionally, because what you're then doing is you're then basically inviting politicians to make them accountable to each other as well as accountable to their communities. Um, Anything else on this, Cyril, before we move on?
No, I guess one thing just to add, when it comes to these, defensive behaviors, and this is something that we have heard from politicians lately, is that sometimes politicians just want to hear like a thank you. Sometimes just to build things up, just like, hey, listen, I've actually been aware of what you guys have been doing, like what you ex-politicians have been doing, and I'm actually in favor of that, or thank you for working on that, right? And sometimes, like, because politicians are not used to being thanked for what they've been doing, right? It actually puts them at the kind of like at the back foot. They're like, oh wait, this person's actually aware of the work that I've been doing, and they're appreciative of it. And sometimes it actually does, you know, what do you say? That does bring down the wall, that defensive wall that politicians do put in. So like maybe do consider that as well as you go into your meeting in terms of like actually what has this person done, and if they haven't done anything, it's perfectly fine too. But as a tip, in terms of like how do we bring down these defensive behaviors.
I think that's such an important point, Cyril. And actually, I recently had an MP say to me, "The trouble is that when I only have people coming to talk to me when they're angry about something," and they were saying, "I know that renewable energy, for example, is really popular in my constituency, but when we, put forward a policy or either locally or nationally that advances that, I never have anyone coming to me and saying that's a great idea, continue doing that. People only ever come to me when they're really angry about something or when they're opposing." So what that means is that those negative voices can be massively disproportionately represented. They can be disproportionately amplified because I think most of us, rightfully, think that if something good is happening, it will just carry on happening. But necessarily, unless we're coming out and going, no, actually, we do really love this, do more of it, that is just as important as trying to push back against something or trying to, force more action. So I do think that's such an important point, Cyril, is ensuring that when we do really like something, when we do think something positive is happening, that we're showing up for that as much as when we are pushing back on something which we don't think is positive and that we think needs to stop.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Joe. We're just going to stop the recording now as we go into the later part of this call. So if you just bear with me, you will hear a sound recording stopping voice as well. Just bear with.